Howdy, cats and kittens. This is Jim Heath, a.k.a. the Reverend Horton Heat. We're at our rehearsal space. We're going to be talking drums with the drummer from Reverend Horton Heat, Scott Churilla. And he's going to talk a little bit, then he's going to give a fabulous demonstration, and then I might have some observations at the end, but hopefully we'll have some fun. Thanks a lot.
Okay, everybody, we are here with Scott Churilla.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to get him to talk a little bit and answer a few questions. Okay, the first question I had for you are, who are your favorite drummers?
Oh, there's so many of them. Ones that come to right off the top of my head are Joe Morello.
Now, he was the guy, he's English?
No, I was going to say someone else. But
Oh, okay, keep going.
okay, an English drummer named Ainsley Dunbar. He was a rock drummer who played with Frank Zappa and a bunch of people and could play all kinds of different styles. And Buddy Rich, of course. And Hal Blaine. There's so many. I'd hate to leave anyone out. There's so many, but at the moment, I'm really into Joe Morello a lot. He's someone I'm really studying out of his books or trying to pick stuff up off of and stuff like that. And I like all drummers, all drummers in general, all good ones.
Some of them are crappy.
They're good too.
You know, like,
sometimes.
sometimes the players that are not as technically or do something technically wrong can actually be really good. Like what comes to mind is and he may not have been that technically wrong, but Keith Moon is kind of controversial because he was such a stylist, but a lot of drummers don't like him, right?
Well, it's funny you say that because when I was growing up, he was one of my favorites. And the thing about that he had, was when you listen to him play, no one else sounded like him. I mean, when he's been dead for years, but when you listen to him play, he's screaming, "I'm alive!" through the I mean, he plays. In the Who, he was perfect. In any other band, he probably wouldn't have worked as well. He had a style. Like when they got Kenny Jones to replace him, it didn't really work.
Right. And Keith Moon had the line in the middle of a session. He stopped and he stood up and he said, "I'm the best Keith Moon style drummer in the world." So no, but anyway, so no, I understand. And I don't really. I'm not that familiar with all of Ainsley. What'd you say his name?
Ainsley Dunbar.
Ainsley Dunbar. Not really that familiar, but you know, used to.
He played on the first 11 Frank Zappa Mothers of Invention albums. And he was a session guy. He played with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Played with Jeff Beck. Played with he played with so many. He played on a David Bowie album called Pinups. He played with all kinds of. He had his own band called the Ainsley Dunbar Retaliation, and he was a blues player, and he grew up playing jazz, and he had a really good shuffle. I'm sure he still does whatever he's doing, but I just liked him because he could play everything, and I could understand it. It wasn't too weird to go over my head, and I could play most of his stuff and understand it. Like, I love Buddy Rich, but let's face it.
Okay, all right. Well, so the first guy you mentioned is the guy, Joe
Morello. He was made famous in the Dave Brubeck Quartet record called Time Out.
Is he the guy that has all that was the teacher that wrote a lot of the books and stuff?
He wrote a lot of books, and he kind of retired early from music, and he became a teacher. And he studied with the great George Lawrence Stone. There's a book called Stick Control by George Lawrence Stone. And he studied with him.
That's kind of an old book, right?
Yeah, it's real old. And
yeah, that's from like the 40s or something?
Or the 20s.
20s.
Yeah. And he taught Joe a lot of things that it's funny about drums. It's like I could tell you how to do something, but you can't do it. It'd be like me if I said my stomach, or I don't feel well. Well, what's wrong? I can't rip out my stomach and show you where it hurts. Like teaching someone how to play drums, like how to just manipulate the stick and stuff, you know, like that's what George taught Joe, and Joe got that. Joe teaches something called like accepting the rebound, and it's a whole different way of playing the drum.
Yeah, I think I remember talking to you about that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just take a pause for just a second, and I'm going to ask you about Buddy Rich and all that. So just hold on just a second. Okay, we're back for part 2 of this interview. And we talked about Joe Morello, and we talked about a little bit about Ainsley Dunbar. And I'm going to get you to see if you could just maybe play a couple of licks. So what about, Buddy Rich is, I guess, one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. What's your thoughts about Buddy Rich?
Oh, for me, he's the greatest drummer that ever lived, because everyone loves him for his drum solos, which are amazing, but he also drove the band so hard that he always looked like he was saying, is that all you have? Give me more. Like, he was just like always, all the way up until he died. In fact, I think he got better after he had his quadruple bypass. They told him not to play for, I think it was 9 weeks, and he was out 2 weeks after he got out of the hospital. Which, he's 69, he's ill, he's playing better than he ever had. So it makes you wonder when people that are half his age are like, I don't know, man, I'm not. That's what I get from Buddy Rich, is to just forge ahead, I'm sick. Well, he had a heart attack, and he played. So I kind of just, from him, yeah, he's the greatest. He's the one.
Well, cool. Well, then, when I think about him is watching him on the Tonight Show, where he would there was a deal where he would do the top and the bottom of the hi-hat. What? Yeah, no, wait. We can't play yet, but we're gonna get you to see if you can show us the top and bottom of hi-hat deal, and we're gonna get you to do show us some of your tricks here in a minute. But let's also talk about, you mentioned Hal Blaine.
Yeah, he played on everything. He's the world's most recorded drummer. I mean, there's a couple drummers that say they are. Bernard Purdie says he is, and he also said he played on a lot of Beatles stuff, but he said he overdubbed, and Beatles only did 2 tracks, so that's impossible, because the drums are on 1 track only and whatever.
Well, but they did used to bounce stuff a lot. It was real intensive bouncing between machines.
He didn't play with the Beatles, so. And then Earl Palmer is another world's most recorded drummer, but Hal played on everything. He played on, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. He played with, you name it, he played with them. Half the stuff you hear on the radio when I was a kid growing up.
Right. Well, he was part of what's called the Wrecking Crew, and they were studio guys that worked every day, and sometimes, I think, didn't he leave a set of drums at all? Like, he had a set of drums at various studios so he could just show up, because he was so in demand. He might go to a bunch of different studios all in one day.
He popularized a lot of things. He was the first drummer to start cartage, which was, like you said, have multiple drum sets, because he was so busy. And he actually hired a guy. He had the first drum tech, technically, who would tune his drums and have them ready at the next session. And they didn't like Hal doing that. The unions didn't. He got in trouble for that. But
because he could work too much?
Well, because he had a guy working for him, moving his gear and stuff. Well, kind of, yeah. And then also a thing that Hal did.
Unions.
Yeah. Another thing Hal did was in the 60s, and then they called him the Wrecking Crew because they said all the guys in the Wrecking Crew would show up in T-shirts and jeans like this, and they'd go, those guys are going to wreck music. They're going to wreck the music industry. So Hal goes, we're the Wrecking Crew. But then Hal was the first guy to he had a pair of timbales, whoops, and he took the bottom, well, he'd slack in the head, and there was no bottom head on a timbale drum. And he got a sound, a doom, a dip out of it, kind of like a doom, the way a single-headed tom would sound. And the producers would start asking him to bring those. And he had, I forget the guy's name, make him an entire set from 6-inch all the way down to 16-inch, what are known as concert toms. Hal Blaine invented those. Right. And he had a 4-piece drum set like this one, and he would, on lighting stands, I forget what you'd call them, he could roll in 4 here and 4 here. And if you listen to one of my favorite bands ever, the Carpenters, you'll hear him play those drums, those single-headed drums, all over on the recordings. And he'll play this set, and he would roll them in. And Ludwig went on to make a drum set called an Octoplus. Octa meaning 8, came with 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 8 toms, all single-headed. And Hal was kind of mad about that, because he thought they might call it the Hal Blaine model or something. They called it the Octoplus.
Yeah, they didn't want to have to pay him royalties.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, then, Yeah, but I know what I remember though a little bit is those were the days where they were kind of getting a little bit more of a deader drum sound. I remember the Tom Rolls and the Carpenters seem a little bit deader than what they were before, when it was just basically, you know, it wasn't really that long before that where they didn't really mic individual drums. They just put a mic over there. And, you know, and said, here you go. But, you know, he was kind of in that first era of where they started close miking drums, and a lot of times then they would pinpoint and say, oh, that drum has a ring, you know, so they would maybe deaden it up a little bit with a little tape or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that was.
But he was also the first guy, right, that didn't have a. He took the front drum head completely off his kick drum.
Yeah, he started doing that. And it's funny because in the later years in his career, he played with John Denver for 6 years, and near the end of his tenure with John Denver, they got a new sound guy. And the sound guy, for some reason or another, didn't like Hal. And he told us to Hal, who invented that. He goes, you know, we're just going to have to take the front head off your bass drum. And Hal looked at the rest of the band and just kind of laughed. And that was one of those last times he played with John Denver.
He was like, guy, I invented that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, then we've kind of covered a little bit. Let's I'm gonna stop for a second now, and we're gonna do a little edit and cut back to Scott playing some examples for you and a couple other questions. Thanks a lot. Okay, here we are with Scott at the drums. Scott, I wanted to ask you what you thought was important for drummers to practice when they're trying to get better.
And more than anything, timing and technique and working out everything, not just your hands, your feet, and your hands. And listening to all kinds of different music, not just one. If you're a heavy metal drummer, listen to Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass. Or the Carpenters. Or just open your and listen to the people around you, what they're doing, and really try and play with them. And start a band.
Yeah, that'll make you better quick, or they'll kick you out. Let me, if you don't mind, play that Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, "A Taste of Honey." That was because what that shows how he would cue the other musicians to where to come in, right? So
quiet.
Well, no, you can play.
But you know they do the.
You can go and play loud. We got it.
Okay, they do the. And he's like, that's 3 bars on the bass drum. That's cool.
Yeah, but the little stuff like that, because it counted off and cued the other musicians where they could come, so they were all coming in straight, and little stuff like that, I think, is what drummers should think about if they're in a band, because they, because rather than just play, you know, you've got to make sure everybody's going to be together and coming in on the right time, and it's important that drummers know how to do that and think of creative ways to do it. So that was a creative way he came.
He said that when they were recording that, they're like, how are we going to get into this? And Hal, being the genius he is, whatever, just did something as simple as that. And it sounds real, like, oh, I could do that, you know. But that doesn't matter if you could do it. Of course you can do it, but he thought of it, and it's simple, and it worked, and it's an important part of the song. Yeah. That's what Hal Blaine did. He was like the wolf in Pulp Fiction. He fixed things, you know, and he was always on time, and he was great. That's why everyone wanted him in their band.